What experience in the workplace radicalized you? Story 1. I once caught my boss watering fake plants in the office. I asked, "You know those are fake, right?" He nodded and said, "Yeah, but that doesn't mean they don't need water." This was the same guy who thought TikTok dances would sell our niche software to 60-year-old mechanic shop owners. He also blew $20K on ads without knowing how Google worked. Fast forward 2 years. The company was bought out, and he somehow convinced the new owners he was a genius. They promoted him to COO, but then realized their mistake and paid him $300K to stay home. If that isn't failing upwards, I don't know what is. Story 2. My manager once told me, "You're critical to this team. I can't let you interview for that promotion because we need you here." I said, "If I'm that critical, you won't mind paying me the same as the promoted position, right?" The look on his face was priceless. 2 weeks later, I had a job somewhere else, making more money and working fewer hours. I sometimes wonder how long it took for him to realize I wasn't bluffing. Story 3. I worked at a grocery store that charged extra for everything and told us in training, "People come here for your smile." My smile was apparently worth $2 per item, but I was getting paid $6 an hour. The kicker? They scheduled me for 45 hours a week when I was only available for 20. I quit by simply not showing up. To this day, I still smile, just not for free. Story 4. One day, I got written up at my factory job because my production dropped to the same level as everyone else. I'd been sick and working slower, but apparently average wasn't acceptable for me. That's when I realized I wasn't a worker. I was their machine. From that day forward, I became an expert at doing just enough to get by. Funny how my low performance didn't seem so bad when it matched theirs. Story 5. My boss once told me he wished he could clone me. At first I felt flattered. Then I realized it just meant I'd be stuck doing twice the work while getting paid the same. That's when I started job hopping. Turns out my skills are worth way more when I take them somewhere else. Maybe I'll send him a postcard one day. Still irreplaceable, but now way richer. Story 6. I had been with my company for 9 years and was a shoo-in for a promotion, or so I thought. I had seniority, experience, and every single box ticked. I went through the interview process and made it to the final 2 candidates. Then came the gut punch. They passed me over for the union president's daughter. She had 5 fewer years on the job and the same degree as me, but she had the right connections. What stung the most wasn't even losing the promotion. It was the complete disregard for my hard work. Every late night, every extra hour, every moment I sacrificed for the company amounted to nothing compared to nepotism. It was that day I realized that competence doesn't count nearly as much as who you know, and I'd never rely on loyalty or merit again. From then on, I've been all about working smart, not hard, and always keeping an escape plan ready. Story 7. It was a Thursday morning when I found out my coworker had killed herself. The office was quiet. A strange mix of shock and grief hung in the air. A few of us stood together trying to process what had happened when the owner walked in. Without missing a beat, he said, "Why is everyone so sad? We've got interviews tomorrow. Let's get back to work." That was it. Just move on like nothing happened. I couldn't believe it. A person we worked with, laughed with, was just gone, and all he cared about was the bottom line. I didn't even finish my shift. I packed up and walked out that day, along with nearly everyone else. The experience shattered any remaining faith I had in corporate America and their hollow claims about valuing employees. Story 8. My supervisor pulled me aside one day and told me I was too valuable to the team to be considered for a promotion. "I can't let you interview for that Tier 3 job opening," he said, "because I need you where you are." Apparently, carrying the workload of half my department was a compliment. I went straight to HR, filed for internal mobility, and had a new job lined up in less than a week. My supervisor was furious and tried to sabotage my transfer by threatening to put me on a performance improvement plan, PIP. It backfired when HR caught wind of his behavior and stepped in to protect me. That incident taught me a critical lesson. The only way to advance is to put yourself first, because no one else will. It wasn't loyalty that got me a raise or a better title. It was knowing when to walk away. Story 9. I once watched my boss try to fix office morale by rearranging everyone's desks. 5 times, in 2 years. Each time he'd give a long speech about his vision. The only vision I had was of him wasting hours moving furniture while we tried to actually work. By desk move #5, we were just betting on how long it'd take before he changed his mind again. Spoiler, 2 months. Story 10. I worked at a call center where the boss thought he was a comedian. One day he threw a battery-powered helicopter across the room, and it hit Ron, a co-worker who was also a veteran. Ron just stood up, looked at him, and sat back down like nothing had happened. But the look in his eyes told a different story. The boss laughed like it was some kind of joke, and everyone else just froze, too scared to say anything. That was the moment I realized how deeply broken this workplace was. If a war hero couldn't even get basic respect, what chance did the rest of us have? I lasted a few more months, but the memory of that helicopter incident stayed with me, a symbol of everything wrong with toxic workplaces. Story 11. My co-worker once got a promotion after spending his first week watering fake plants in the lobby. I wish I were joking. The man wasted more water on plastic ferns than I did on actual work. When I asked if he knew they were fake, he said, "Yeah, but better safe than sorry." He's now making triple my salary. Sometimes I think I'm in the wrong business, or the wrong timeline. Story 12. I once worked as a correctional officer, and quickly learned the inmates weren't the most dangerous part of the job. The other officers were. I was one of 3 white COs in the entire prison, and I faced racism daily. What shocked me the most, though, was how much my colleagues would go out of their way to sabotage each other. Gossip, backstabbing, and outright lies were the norm. One officer spread a rumor about me that nearly cost me my job, all because he wanted my shift schedule. It became clear that the prison wasn't just a place for inmates. It was a cage for us too, trapping us in a cycle of distrust and hostility. I got out as soon as I could, but that experience completely reshaped how I view authority and the systems we work within. Story 13. It was the summer of my first corporate job, and I was eager to prove myself. I landed a position at a health insurance company, and our project was ambitious, using data to identify early warning signs for severe health issues. I was proud to be part of something that could genuinely save lives. We worked for years, pouring everything into this system, spending tens of millions of dollars. Then, the lead of our project got promoted. His replacement hated him, and in what seemed like an act of pure spite, he scrapped the entire project. Just like that, years of innovation and effort were trashed because someone couldn't put their ego aside. What blew my mind even more was how this company operated. Different teams were charged for using internal tools, essentially creating a system where we build ourselves into inefficiency. That was my first real look behind the corporate curtain, and it shattered me. I realized these companies don't care about making a difference. They care about egos, budgets, and keeping themselves afloat, no matter the cost. It was the last time I ever believed in the greater good of corporate missions. Story 14. I was working at a health insurance company when I had 2 unforgettable calls in the same day. The first was a man trying to get dialysis, a treatment that was fully covered by his plan, but the system kept denying his claims. Desperate and dying, he threatened to find me, rape me, and kill me. As much as his words shook me, I couldn't bring myself to fully blame him. He was being failed by the system, and I was the one stuck delivering the bad news. Later, an elderly woman called about her son, an addict who'd overdosed on fentanyl. Instead of calling 911, she called me. She was frail, confused, and devastated. I had to call an ambulance for her, knowing full well that her son's addiction stemmed from our company refusing to pay for his treatments. That job broke me. It showed me how little corporations care about the lives they affect, and how we, the workers, are just shields for their negligence. Story 15. My first job in high school was at an upscale grocery store. During orientation, they proudly explained that customers paid $1, $2 extra per item because of the smiles and service the employees provided. I was getting paid $6 an hour. I remember thinking, if my smile is worth that much, why am I being paid so little? I made it clear I could only work 20 hours a week because of school, but by my third week, they had me scheduled for 45 hours. When I asked about it, the manager just shrugged and told me to suck it up. That's when I decided I was done. I ghosted them that week, and I've never felt guilty about it. That experience was my first lesson in how companies exploit workers, especially the young and inexperienced. Story 16. At a call center I worked at, my boss thought throwing a remote control helicopter into the back of a veteran's head was hilarious. The veteran just sighed, sat down and muttered, "Not worth it." Meanwhile, the boss covered his face, laughing like a cartoon villain. That's when I realized the real workplace hazard wasn't the job, it was the boss. Story 17. I was a correctional officer at a high-security prison. You'd think the inmates would be the toughest part of the job, but it wasn't. It was the other officers. I was one of 3 white COs in the whole facility, and every day I faced racism from my colleagues. They'd mess with my shifts, spread rumors, and even deliberately put me in dangerous situations. But the worst part wasn't just the racism, it was the toxic environment of the entire staff. Gossip, power plays, and outright sabotage were everywhere. People I thought I could trust would turn on me in an instant if it served their interests. Once, a fellow officer accused me of negligence to get me written up, just because he wanted a weekend shift I had. It became clear this wasn't a job. It was survival of the fittest, and I was in the crosshairs. I lasted 3 years before I walked away, disillusioned and burned out. That experience taught me that corruption isn't just in the system we oversee, it's in the very people meant to enforce it. Story 18. There was a day I realized I wasn't just working hard, I was being exploited. My boss praised me constantly, even told me he wished he could clone me. At first I thought it was a compliment. Then it hit me. I was being worked into the ground because I was dependable, not because they saw potential in me. I started paying closer attention, and every promotion went to someone less competent but easier to replace. They didn't want to lose their workhorse. After 2 years of this, I stopped going the extra mile. I started job hopping, and within 3 years, I had doubled my salary. I learned that loyalty in the workplace is a one-way street, and I wasn't about to keep walking down it. Story 19. I'll never forget when I was offered a promotion at my retail job, only to have it ripped away a week later. After busting my ass for 4 years, they finally asked if I wanted to become a supervisor. Of course, I said yes. The following week, I was told I'd be training a new supervisor they hired on Indeed, and my hours were being cut from 35 to 12 per week. I was furious. I quit on the spot, leaving them scrambling. Later, I heard that new supervisor didn't last 2 weeks before quitting herself because of how toxic the environment was. That was the last time I ever let a company dangle a carrot in front of me. Now I know better than to trust empty promises. Story 20. When I started in my company's leadership fast-track program, I thought I was on the path to success. I crushed every metric, received glowing feedback, and was clearly the top candidate. Then, out of nowhere, I was removed from the program. When I asked why, they told me, "This isn't for you." It was a DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program, and as a straight white man, I apparently didn't qualify. To make it worse, when I requested a transfer to a better location for my role, I was told, "We don't need more of you there." It wasn't just rejection. It felt personal. That experience left me feeling angry, excluded, and betrayed. It was the first time I truly understood what workplace discrimination feels like, and it changed my perspective forever. Story 21. When I first started working at the call center, I figured it'd be a temporary gig. But then there was the day my boss threw a battery-powered helicopter across the room, hitting Ron, a co-worker and a veteran, right in the head. Ron just stood up, shook his head, and sat back down. The boss laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world, covering his face like some schoolyard bully. Ron didn't say a word, but the look in his eyes said everything. This wasn't worth fighting over. That moment completely broke me. Here was a man who had served his country, now working in a thankless job just to support his family, being humiliated by someone who thought their title made them untouchable. No one said anything. No one reported it. It felt like we were all trapped in some dystopian nightmare where this was just the way things worked. I quit a few months later, and I still think about Ron sometimes. I hope he got out too. Story 22. One time I asked my boss why I wasn't being promoted despite doing the work of 4 people. His response? Because you're too good at what you do. I guess I should have been aiming for mildly incompetent instead of excellent. Lesson learned, don't outshine the sun or your boss. Story 23. I worked at a factory where I prided myself on being the top performer. Week after week, I put out more parts than anyone else. Then one week I caught a cold. My production dropped to the same level as everyone else, and you'd think I had committed a crime. I was written up for low performance. Let that sink in. They punished me for doing the same work as my peers because I wasn't outperforming them that week. That was the last time I cared about going above and beyond for any company. If I'm going to be penalized for not breaking my back, then they don't deserve my best effort. I still do my job, but never more than what I'm paid for. Story 24. When my boss started micromanaging, it felt like she had a personal vendetta against productivity. Our team was running smoothly under the old boss, but when health issues forced her to leave, the new boss decided to fix what wasn't broken. She watched us like hawks, second-guessed every decision, and demanded constant updates on even the simplest tasks. Morale plummeted. Within 2 weeks, every single member of the middle management staff, myself included, handed in their resignation. By the time the company realized the mistake, it was too late. That was my first taste of how quickly a bad leader can destroy a good team. I learned that no paycheck is worth sacrificing your mental health or professional dignity. Story 25. At a previous job, my manager micromanaged so hard that she timed my bathroom breaks. Meanwhile, her best friend spent all day scrolling through TikTok. I once accidentally mentioned that my emails take longer because of all the tracking spreadsheets she made us fill out. She called me a smartass, but at least I got a few uninterrupted bathroom trips out of it. Story 26. The day I was asked to train my replacement was the day I realized how little my loyalty meant to the company. I had worked there for 4 years, pulling double shifts, covering for sick coworkers, and doing everything they ever asked of me. Finally, they offered me a promotion to supervisor. I was thrilled, thinking all my hard work was finally paying off. Then, 1 week later, they hired someone off Indeed for the role I was supposed to have, slashed my hours from 35 a week to 12, and told me I'd be training the new hire. It was like a slap in the face. They didn't even try to sugarcoat it. They just flat out replaced me. I quit on the spot, leaving them scrambling. The new hire didn't last 2 weeks before quitting herself, citing how awful the environment was. That moment taught me a brutal but important lesson. Never trust a company to do right by you. Your value to them is only as good as their next convenience. Story 27. I used to believe companies cared about their employees until I saw a coworker bullied into suicide by our department director. She was a beloved trainer, a mother of 2, and one of the kindest people I'd ever met. The director's harassment pushed her to the edge, and when she passed, everyone was devastated. During the funeral, literally during the funeral, we all got an email announcing they were hiring for her position. I was horrified. It wasn't just disrespectful. It was dehumanizing. That was the moment I realized the truth. To corporations, we're not people. We're replaceable cogs in their machine. I've never looked at an employer the same way since. Story 28. I got denied a cost of living raise after a glowing performance review. The same week, the university chancellor emailed us to brag about $2.2 billion in grants and her $2 million salary. I emailed back, "Congrats! Can I have a 1% raise now?" She didn't reply, but I think HR might have framed it. Story 29. I worked my way up from entry-level to assistant supervisor at a mortgage company over 6 years. I was loyal, hardworking, and even relocated to Texas when my department moved. One day, out of the blue, I was laid off without a second thought. No severance, no acknowledgement of my dedication, just a pink slip. Watching my bosses walk away unscathed, while those of us who kept the place running were discarded, made me realize how little loyalty means to a company. Since then, I've stopped giving more than what's required. If they don't value their employees, why should I value them? Story 30. I'll never forget the time my boss bought marble from Italy for his house while telling me he couldn't afford to pay my overtime. I was working long hours, often staying late to finish projects, and every request for fair compensation was met with excuses about budget constraints. Then one day, I overheard him bragging about the imported marble countertops he'd just installed. That was it for me. I stopped putting in extra effort right then and there. If there's money for luxury decor but not for the people who make your business run, then your priorities are screwed up, and I refuse to be exploited by someone like that. Story 31. I once worked at a tech company where the lead on a major project got promoted, and his replacement canceled the entire thing out of spite. The project was groundbreaking, a system that could use health records to predict and prevent serious medical conditions. It had the potential to save lives and millions of dollars, but because of petty office politics, years of work and tens of millions of dollars were thrown away. To make matters worse, teams within the company charged each other to use internal tools, creating a ridiculous cycle of inefficiency. That job showed me just how much ego and greed can sabotage innovation and progress. I left shortly after, disgusted by the sheer waste and dysfunction. Story 32. I used to work at a high-producing oil company, managing an asset that was the #1 performer in their portfolio. We were riding high on our success when the company held a massive meeting to announce layoffs and promotions. Over 300 of us attended, and they called 7 names to leave the room. Everyone else laughed, thinking, "Wow, we're only losing 7 people. That's not bad at all." Then the doors opened, and security guards walked in. They escorted us out in groups of 10, telling us to collect our belongings. It turned out the 7 names they called earlier were the only ones they were keeping. The rest of us, nearly 300 employees, were cut on the spot. I remember the shock, the betrayal, and the sinking realization that being the best performing team didn't matter at all. It was all about numbers, and we were just expendable. That experience changed the way I view companies forever. They'll smile to your face while sharpening the knife behind your back.